Hello everyone, my name is Kaveri Medappa and I am a PhD student at the School of Global Studies, University of Sussex. My presentation is entitled Making Life, Aspirations, Commitments and Entrapments amongst platform-based drivers and food delivery workers in Bangalore, India. One of the hallmarks of platform-based businesses, as most of us here are aware, is their classification of workers as micro-entrepreneurs or as self-employed persons, supposedly for the freedom and flexibility that so-called partners enjoy in this form of work. However, findings from numerous empirical studies trouble such platform claims. The workings of algorithmic management, which nudge and control workers, the disproportionate risks that they are made to assume, and the coercive practices which platforms engage in to suppress dissent are quite well known and documented. However, while these studies have been invaluable in revealing the paradoxical experiences of flexibility and control amongst platform workers, they were inadequate to understand some of the most glaring experiences and articulations which workers shared with me during my fieldwork in Bangalore, an aspiring world-class city, also referred to as the startup capital of India. I carried out ethnographic fieldwork in 2019-2020 with platform-based food delivery workers and cab drivers, two of the most visible and popular sectors of platform-enabled services in Bangalore. This paper is focused around three main questions. Why did workers feel like earnings depended on one's hard work in a labor process they had little control over? Why did workers speak about increasing financial commitments despite admitting that they earn better in platform work compared to previous jobs? Why did workers continue to remain in app-based work despite falling incomes? In answering these questions, I point to the material affective attachments for the good life engendered by the promises of platform work, and also show how these attachments fed into several social entanglements which workers found themselves in. Using English words such as addiction and commitments, workers spoke of attachments and socio-cultural entanglements which shaped their life, experiences of work, and subjectivities as much as modes of algorithmic management did. I show how the platform model structured workers' lives outside of platforms, outside of their login hours, so to speak, as work closely interacted with existing social cultural aspirations and practices. To help me frame my analysis, I draw from Susanna Narodsky and Nico Besnia's articulation of making a living as being a lot more than selling one's labor power in exchange for remuneration. Drawing from economic anthropology and feminist economics, theirs is an understanding of the economy which is very much tethered to the rest of human existence, to the social ties which bind us to each other, the aspirations and interdependencies which shape us and which we rely on. I also draw from Lauren Berlin's Cruel Optimism to make sense of workers' fraught relationship with platform work, the feeling of being bound to platforms for the relative freedoms it offered, even amidst a growing dissatisfaction with platform work. So what were these material affective attachments and how did platforms and workers together produce these attachments? Platform-based driving and food delivery work is dominated by men working in these jobs as full-time workers. Of the 100-odd food delivery workers and drivers I met on the streets of Bangalore, only 4 happened to be women and close to 90% were full-time workers. For a majority of workers who were previously employed in mostly informal manufacturing or service sector jobs, this new form of work, with its many promises, represented freedom. Piece rates combined with the gamified target and incentive model of remuneration gave workers the feeling of earnings being proportionate to one's hard work. It signaled a freedom from the low payments and fixed salaries which afflicted their previous jobs. The digital mediation of work also meant freedom from the indignities of bossism. Here I am not answerable to anyone. It's my wish if I want to work or not, as several workers said. The shorter remuneration cycles in platform work also was materially appealing to workers. Platforms paid workers weekly or every alternate day, resulting in quicker access to one's incomes, while also getting workers used to a new temporal cycle with respect to earnings and spending. Platforms delivered on their promises, at least in the first few years of their market making, roughly between 2014 and 17. The piece rates were high, incentives were very generous. Incomes doubled and tripled in many cases. Even software engineers didn't earn that much, recalled a driver participant. Platform businesses, especially Uber and Ola, encouraged lakhs of people to migrate out of rural areas into cities like Bangalore. These businesses gave wing to aspirations of entrepreneurship and achieving economic mobility by investing in a car and becoming a driver. Ola and Uber encouraged drivers to get indebted not just to buy one car, but to invest in multiple cars. Some drivers found themselves becoming owners of small businesses, as they called it, owning 2 to 3 cars for which they employed drivers and which they attached with Uber and Ola. The desire to own a car and not work under anyone is a treasured aspiration for male drivers, a majority of whom come from agricultural, land owning, or animal rearing caste groups. As workers experienced high incomes in both these sectors, aspirations took flight and needs increased. Kids were put in better schools, old debts were cleared, some male migrant workers moved their families to Bangalore, financial obligations towards parents and close relatives were enhanced. Platform work enabled men to become better providers for their families. Workers also invested in more number of cheaty groups. Cheaties are a popular group-based savings and borrowing mechanism, mostly created around social or kinship networks, which participants were already part of. With rising incomes in platform work, people started becoming cheaty members in more groups and in cheaty groups with high-value cheaty amounts. Such high-value cheaty payments would become means to enhance one's social prestige in the future, to build or renovate houses or to buy land. Cheaties, as much as being as much as being an avenue for savings, also doubled up as immediate sources of borrowing during financial emergencies. The piece rate system, as is well documented, gave workers a sense of autonomy and drive, which is why even today some workers say how much we earn is up to us. Young single food delivery workers, for instance, worked until dawn and still continue to do so to make use of the late night bonus which platforms provide. The unpredictability of one's earnings is alluring to workers who manage to earn better when there are surge prizes, sudden offers and bonuses during festivals, holidays or sporting tournaments. Workdays were never the same. One day would be great, another not so great. The experience of work was embodied and affective at many levels. The fatigue, the body pains, the lack of sleep, the embarrassment for some of being a delivery boy, the frustration from long hours of waiting were dotted by a sense of anticipation for a good day, the pride and sense of value one felt of providing a valuable service to customers, of asserting one's ownership of a car, the sense of elation when one reached the day's targets, and so on. Despite conditions of work consistently slipping and workers being very aware of that, these material affective attachments to work were enduring. This work is like addiction, said workers over and over again, drugs and addiction becoming commonly mentioned articulations of their relationship to work. During the time of my field work, with the initial honeymoon period long gone, workers struggled to juggle the many commitments they had accumulated. The English word commitments was perhaps one of the most used words during conversations with workers, which were all in Kannada and Hindi. Commitments is a widely used word amongst Kannada speakers and refers to one's financial obligations and expenses which have to be met. Commitments are largely debts, but could also refer to payments that have to be made towards cheaties, everyday living expenses, school fees, rents, or even obligations to keep up to one's parents or other relatives. By 2019-20, the platforms I study had all evolved into late-stage ventures, which needed to slow down their cash burn and enhance rates of revenue. Exploiting the labor surplus situation in India and pushing incomes down was a ready solution for them. For instance, Swiggy and Zomato slashed incentives and also paid newer joinees lower piece rates. The rates which Uber and Ola drivers were paid had come down by half between 2017 and 2019, and incentives had been cut to the tune of 80%. Workers were caught in a bind. Older levels of income was a mirage. The alternatives for most workers who lacked the social and cultural capital to get out of platform work was either unemployment or another low-wage job. Both options unaffordable to many given new levels of commitments. Platform work, despite its deteriorating income levels, was still preferred as it allowed one to stretch one's working day to try and keep up with previous income levels, i.e., it allowed workers to indulge in self-exploitation characteristic to piecework. In this case, piecework which could be accessed 24/7. Workdays of 12 hours was repeatedly mentioned as the minimum one had to spend on the streets, and workers often showed me login hour screens with 14, 16, or even 19 hours of work a day. Workers' lives became more and more financialized, with indebtedness increasing, workers juggling one debt with another. This is especially prevalent amongst drivers who simply had to keep up with the expensive car loan installments. Debt repayment cycles, GT payments for instance, mirrored the weekly payment cycles that platforms had got workers used to by then. Some workers who were relatively better off hedged against their insecure livelihoods by circulating their savings into informal money lending on high interest rates, sometimes to their own friends. Workers tried to keep up with the burden of GT payments because GT groups often consisted of relatives and or neighbors, and defaulting on these payments was shameful and also closed off a potential source of good debt. Drivers faced multiple pressures to save the car, their only source of livelihood. Drivers with pending loans on their cars were stuck between a rock and a hard place, unable to earn sufficiently to meet their many commitments, especially their car loans, while also being unable to quit platform-based driving. For many migrant drivers, returning to the village empty-handed without having anything to show for their prosperity in the city meant having to face ridicule from their neighbors in their villages or towns, and therefore was not a possible solution. Despite these realities of platform work and articulations of being used, cheated, and trapped by platforms, addictions still held sway for workers who could not afford to leave platforms. The possibility of a good day at work lurking around the corner, platforms still being a source of relatively better incomes if one stretched their working days to 14 or 15 hours, not having to answer a human boss, were aspects of work which workers expressed they had become adjusted to. Importantly, workers were also becoming used to a shorter temporal cycle, usually stretching to a day or a week. Earnings, targets, expenses, and their commitments also beginning to follow or mirror this compressed temporality. As many participants expressed, platform work left them physically and mentally depleted at the end of the day, allowing them little time or energy to think of what else to do. Workers often brought up how their biggest struggle was to survive that day. For many, platform work built hopes about breaking away from the unfreedoms of waged work. Its promises and the initial high incomes it delivered brought to life long-held aspirations and gave rise to newer ones. However, as platforms began to squeeze worker incomes ever more, I show how experiences of freedom quickly turned into articulations of entrapments and unfreedoms, emerging from the social obligations and commitments which workers are currently struggling to keep up with. Nevertheless, platforms continue to be the primary, if not only, source of livelihood for many who remain in it, contesting and mobilizing against platform injustices, while also being hesitant to let go of platform work and its addictive aspects. That's all. Thank you.